Hey, good morning. I'm Patricia Murphy. It's Tuesday. This is Seattle Now. Gun violence is painful. The grief for families and neighbors lasts long past the headlines. The King County Prosecutors Office thinks data can help with solutions. Since 2016, the office has collected data quarterly about where gun violence occurs and who's being affected. This latest report has some interesting findings. In a minute, KUOW's Amy Radil will break down the numbers and what they might mean. But first, let's get you caught up. Mayor Katie Wilson will deliver her first ever State of the City address today. The mayor will lay out her agenda for the year ahead, so expect to hear about issues like affordability, homelessness, and public safety. The address begins at 11:50 a.m. at the Langston Hughes Performing Arts Institute in the Central District. It will also be broadcast on the Seattle channel. Today is a key deadline in the Washington state legislature. Bills that don't leave their house of origin by the end of the day will no longer be considered in this legislative session. It's the second year of the legislature's biennial structure, so bills filed in 2025 will have to be refiled next year. Washington's 60-day session is moving fast. Lawmakers have less than a month until sine die on March 12th. And the U.S. Postal Service will honor Bruce Lee this week with a new Forever stamp. It's pretty cool. It features artwork of a black and white painting of Lee executing his famous flying kick. To commemorate the new stamp, USPS is hosting an event tomorrow afternoon at the Nippon Con Theater in the CID. We're back with more headlines on tonight's episode of Seattle Now. A new report that quantifies gunshots in King County shows some improvement. In some cases, gun deaths are down. However, a recent shooting near Rainier Beach High School that killed 2 students shows that there is much work that remains. KUOW's Amy Radil reports on courts and politics. She's here to help us understand the numbers. Amy, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you.
So before we get going here, let's give listeners some context. What is the Shots Fired report and how is it used?
Yeah, so these reports are part of an effort that's been going for about the last 10 years. They consider it kind of a public health and data lens on gun violence. So the King County Prosecutors Office gathers data from local law enforcement, and they count up the shots that are fired that, sometimes people call 911 to report them, or if police are at a scene and witness them. And then the county counts how many people, were killed or injured in gun violence. And then they also count up shots that hit property and do damage there, and then shots that are fired even if they don't hit anything. And then the prosecutor's office breaks out the victims so we know more about who was harmed by their location, by age groups, by race and ethnicity. So, for years we've been able to really see the disparities and who was really bearing the brunt of gun violence here.
Okay, so a lot of really important information in there. And again, just to help our listeners understand the changes we're going to be talking about, how has gun violence been trending in the last 6 years or so?
After 2019, gun violence spiked dramatically here through about 2023, and then it began to decline. It was in line with national trends, but it happened a bit later than what was happening in other states. And now with this year's decline, it's come to the point that there was even kind of this odd coincidence. We actually had the same number of gun violence victims in King County as 6 years ago. So 2019 and 2025, we had 235 people as victims of gun violence. So you can kind of imagine this arc up and down through the pandemic years.
Okay. This new reporting is noteworthy for a couple of other reasons as well. What did it show?
This latest report compared the fourth quarter of 2025 with the fourth quarter a year before, and it showed some significant reductions in victims overall, but especially among Black males, among people who were 17 and younger, and among people in South King County. And those have been populations of really key concern, some of the people at highest risk of being a victim of gun violence. So I thought those declines were really interesting. An analyst at King County also said that last year in general, things improved. We didn't have the usual kind of summer spike in shootings that tends to be kind of a seasonal issue that we see. So 2025 was better in general, but then in the fourth quarter, things really declined. Another interesting finding was that South King County, for several years, it had more gun violence than Seattle. So if you can imagine kind of two data lines, South King County was above Seattle's. And in that last fourth quarter, it actually dipped below Seattle. It crossed the line. And also for the first time in 5 years, Black males were not the majority of victims in this last quarter. The majority of victims were white, and that's more in line with the demographics of the county.
Wow. King County Prosecutor Lisa Mannion called this latest report encouraging. You actually spoke to her. What else did she say, Amy?
The upshot of her response was, she talked about various strategies that are paying off, from prevention to investigation strategies. She said, this trend continued from 2024 through 2025. So that's what they really want to see, is that, that kind of continuity. She said that suggests that we are sort of back in the realm of pre-pandemic norms.
Well, I think the big takeaway from looking at the 2025 data is that we've had 2 years of reduced gun violence in King County. And when you look at the data from 2025, it is the safest year in terms of gun violence that King County has seen since before the pandemic. Those are significant numbers.
And she mentioned the city of Kent in South King County as one that is seeing the results of those reductions. So that's why I wanted to follow up with them.
Yeah, what do we know about what Kent is doing that's making a difference to address gun violence?
Some of the things they're doing, I think, are pretty general strategies, not unique to them, but they're just kind of things that they've, realized in the last several years are really bearing results. One of them is police are putting more attention into trying to track when the same gun shows up at different shootings and different scenes, even across different cities. So they can upload an image into this national database, and each fired cartridge case apparently, is unique. And so they can start to see, these cases show that the same gun was used at multiple incidents in different cities across the county. And then another strategy kind of, in general in the last few years is police are putting more resources into solving non-fatal shootings than they did in the past. I talked to Kent Police Chief Rafael Padilla, and he said, especially when staffing was strained in recent years, police have always focused on fatal shootings because, of course, loss of life is the paramount concern. But Chief Padilla said there's more recognition now that solving non-fatal shootings is really key to preventing further violence.
I want to put a plug in. It wasn't just Kent. We're talking the South King County agencies in Seattle got together a while back to say we need to approach this differently.
Amy, we've talked on the show recently about privacy concerns associated with police surveillance technology. Did Chief Padilla say anything about that?
He did. And I think that, this will be a little bit more of a tension point sometimes because, I think everyone's on board with focusing on non-fatal shootings and tracking the shell casings. Those aren't really controversial that I'm aware of. But there is a lot of public anxiety over surveillance in terms of federal immigration enforcement right now. And yet local law enforcement leaders are saying, these are important tools. These are also responsible for these statistics in gun violence, right? So Chief Padilla said he thinks it's important for cities to be able to use the flock cameras, which are a type of automated license plate reader, but in fixed locations, to solve local crimes. And he said he believes that safeguards can be put in place to make sure that the data isn't used for immigration enforcement. State lawmakers are looking at legislation with some restrictions right now to address that. And then I hear the police chief in Seattle, Sean Barnes, making that same case for the city's closed circuit cameras in certain neighborhoods. He said recently that that kind of footage really aided their investigations. It played a role in solving 17 homicides last year. So again, don't take this tool away from us. It's really important. But the ACLU and the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project and organizations like that are asking Seattle's Mayor Katie Wilson not to expand those surveillance cameras to additional neighborhoods beyond where they are now, which is on Aurora and the Chinatown International District, over those concerns.
Yes, Amy, a lot of dialogue around those cameras. Let's talk more about the partnerships Mannion and Padilla highlighted. How do nonprofits in Kent help decrease crime?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to another way that cities are using data is to look for young people who have a proximity to gun violence, because these are people who they're not accused of any crime, but they may be at the scene of a shooting. And research suggests that most gun violence occurs within pretty tight social networks. And so that means that these young people are at a high risk to get caught up in gun violence the next time it happens. Chief Padilla said when these young people are identified, Kent has a pilot project with 2 local nonprofits. They're called Project Be Free and the Latino Civic Alliance. And those groups intervene and offer support not just to that young person, but to their whole family as well.
But if you can address the family needs and the family issues, and in addition to the individual needs, and elevate families and create strong environments, healthy environments, we see and we believe these kids don't get caught up in the system and they go a different path.
King County has had some ups and downs with this approach. There was a lot of interest in 2020 in funding these kinds of interventions. But then, we here at the station have reported on problems like lack of background checks with some of the nonprofits who were working directly with youth, the county's failure to track some of that funding to the nonprofits. Prosecutor Mannion last year said these community supports are not effective enough for youth if they are accused of felonies. So we've seen King County refine this approach, and Chief Padilla said this type of prevention is working. He said, his view is it has to be combined with enforcement and accountability, in kind of this comprehensive approach to gun violence to get the reductions that we're seeing. So he wanted to stress that he doesn't think people should pick and choose the approaches that they're most comfortable with ideologically. It has to be kind of multifaceted.
How does this compare to what Seattle's doing?
I think all these strategies are present in varying degrees around the county, and police recruiting has improved the staffing situation in Seattle. So, presumably they have the ability to do things like the focus on non-fatal shootings, things that, they just take more people, more resources. Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes gave a State of the City address recently. So he said the shots fired in general in Seattle were down 12% last year over the year before, and homicides had even steeper drops. And kind of back to the pre-pandemic norms. These are pretty small numbers in Seattle, so that means it doesn't take as much to cause them to really spike or drop. You can see bigger percentage changes because of those small numbers. But one strategy that Chief Barnes noted was a big increase in the number of firearms recovered by Seattle police, over 1,500 last year, mostly pistols.
Wow, Amy. We've been talking about really important information here, but also these shots are connected to people and families, and that's really important.
And I think it makes these people that I've been talking to very cautious when they discuss this, because trends don't matter if you have lost someone. So they said, let's try to see what's working. Things are going in a positive direction, but they emphasize there's still lots of work to do.
Yeah, and a decrease in shots fired is a hard reality for community members and parents to reconcile when 3 young people in Seattle were killed by gun violence in one weekend, including 2 students near Rainier Beach High School January 30th. How has Seattle Police Chief Sean Barnes responded to that? What has he said? When
Chief Barnes spoke at the Northwest African American Museum, it was just after that weekend of those shootings. And he said people are grieving, and he said everyone is recommitting to the work ahead. But it definitely keeps anyone from feeling complacent, even when the larger picture is improving. I saw that the Rainier Beach Action Coalition has organized a public safety town hall for Friday, March 6th at the Ethiopian community in Seattle. So that might be a place where we hear more of what is a public need and want. And they're also helping channel support to the families of the 2 teenagers.
How are you thinking about this shots fired report, Amy? You report on law enforcement and justice issues. Do you have stories you'd like to do?
For sure. I think, we're always trying to learn more about prevention and intervention because that's like a relatively newer area where people are trying different things. We want to know what works, what doesn't. And then, I'm no data wizard, but I don't want to make too much of last year's fourth quarter numbers unless those trends continue.
Yeah, important context, Amy. KUOW Courts and Politics reporter Amy Radil, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate you listening to Seattle Now, and thank you to our generous donors for your financial support. Take a minute right now and rate and review the show on your favorite podcast app. Today's episode was produced by Brooklyn Jamerson Flowers. It was edited by Caroline Chamberlain Gomez. Our production team also includes Andy Hurst, Vaughn Jones, and Paige Browning. Greg Kramer does our theme music. Seattle Now and KUOW Public Radio are members of the NPR network. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tonight for Evening Headlines.